I almost didn't go that day. That's the thing that keeps coming back to me whenever I think about it. My feet were already sore from 2 days of walking around London, and my cousin Priya had suggested we skip Buckingham Palace entirely. It's just a gate, she said. We've seen gates, and, honestly, I was half convinced. But something made me say no. Some stupid tourist instinct. The kind that makes you drag yourself to one more landmark even when your trainers are screaming. So we went. It was a Thursday morning, late October. The kind of London morning that can't decide what it wants to be: pale grey sky, the sun trying its best behind a layer of cloud that wasn't quite thick enough to call rain but wasn't thin enough to call sunshine either. That in-between London light that makes everything look like an old photograph. The kind of day where you pull your jacket a little tighter not because it's truly cold but because the air has a damp edge to it, the sort that settles into your shoulders. The mall was already busy by the time we got there. Not packed, not summer crowds packed, but that steady October tourist hum that never really stops, not even in the off-season. Families with pushchairs. Older couples with proper cameras, not just phones. A school group in matching yellow high-vis vests moving in that chaotic single-file way that school groups always move, like a very enthusiastic caterpillar. Japanese tourists with good cameras. An American couple in matching red puffer jackets studying a paper map with the focused intensity of people who refused to admit they were lost. The kind of crowd where everyone is vaguely aware of everyone else but nobody is really watching anybody. The Victoria Memorial was gleaming despite the grey sky, that white marble catching even the weak autumn light and throwing it back. Pigeons everywhere. There is always, in my experience, an unreasonable number of pigeons near any famous monument in any city on earth, and London is no exception. A little girl near us was chasing them with the pure joyful aggression of a toddler who has not yet learned that birds can fly, shrieking with delight every time they scattered. Priya was already taking photos. I stood there for a moment, just taking it in. The palace itself behind that famous iron gate, the long grey facade, the red and gold of the ceremonial entrance. The guards on duty at their posts, those black sentry boxes, the bearskin hats rising above the fence line, the immaculate red tunics even at this distance. There's something about those guards that does something to the atmosphere. It's hard to explain if you haven't stood there in person. On television or in photos, the whole thing looks almost theatrical. Almost like a set dressing. But when you're actually there, standing on the gravel with the palace right in front of you, those figures have a weight to them. A stillness that doesn't feel performed. It feels practiced. Deeply, deliberately practiced. Like stillness that cost something to learn. I didn't know then that I was about to watch that stillness get tested. We'd been there maybe 20 minutes when I first noticed the boy. He was hard to miss, honestly. Not because of anything specific he was doing yet, just the energy of him. 16, maybe 17. That age where boys carry themselves with a particular kind of loud confidence, the kind that hasn't yet met enough consequences to develop any doubt. Tall for his age, wearing one of those oversized hoodies with an American college name across the chest, the type you buy in a gift shop and have never actually attended, and those enormous trainers that seem to be architectural achievements more than footwear. His hair was that deliberately messy style that actually takes more effort to maintain than a neat cut would. He was with what looked like his family, a tired-looking woman I assumed was his mother, a man with a camera bag who kept checking his phone, and a younger girl who was pulling at her mother's sleeve and pointing at the pigeons. They had that slightly frazzled look of a family who had been doing tourist things together for too many days in a row and were operating at about 60% mutual goodwill. The boy, I'll call him what he later introduced himself as, because he did introduce himself, which is a detail I'll get to. The boy was walking with that particular teenage swagger that's almost like a physical announcement. Like his body was saying I am here, and I know it before his mouth had a chance to say anything at all. I noticed him, I registered him as confident teenager, and then I went back to watching the changing of the guard preparation happening further along the forecourt. Priya had found a decent spot along the fence and was trying to line up a shot between two other tourists' elbows. "The light's terrible," she muttered. "It's fine. It's flat." "Priya." "I'm just saying," and that's when the commotion started. Not a commotion exactly. More like a shift in the crowd's attention. The way a crowd moves when something is happening that isn't in the normal script, that subtle collective reorientation, shoulders turning, people nudging each other, phones lifting. I turned to look. The boy had separated from his family and was standing very close to the gate. Not climbing it, not doing anything technically wrong, just standing close. Closer than most people bother to, actually, because most people have an instinctive understanding of the boundary even without a physical barrier stopping them. He was close enough that he was clearly the focus of the nearest guard's line of sight, even though the guard, immobile, positioned about 15 feet beyond the gate, showed nothing. Not a flicker. The boy was talking. I couldn't hear what he was saying from where I stood. But I could read the body language. He had his hands in his hoodie pockets, head slightly tilted, and he was talking with the casual ease of someone who had decided that the silence of the guard was a conversation rather than a wall. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't being aggressive. He was doing that thing that certain confident teenagers do, performing nonchalance for an audience he'd decided he had. A man next to me chuckled. Ah, the classic, try to make him blink routine. His wife sighed fondly, the way people sigh at something mildly predictable. They weren't wrong. You see it at the palace more than anywhere else. People, usually young, usually male, usually with an audience they're aware of, positioning themselves in front of the guards and doing various things designed to provoke a reaction. Making faces. Telling jokes. Asking ridiculous questions into the rigid silence. It's almost a ritual. Almost a rite of passage for a certain kind of tourist. Most guards, in my experience, have seen it approximately 10,000 times and have achieved a kind of transcendent indifference to it. I expected this to be that. A minute, maybe two, of the boy performing confidence into the void, getting nothing back, and then retreating to his family with either a shrug or a slightly embarrassed laugh. That is not what happened. I started actually paying attention about 30 seconds in. Something about the way the boy was standing changed. The casual hands in pockets posture shifted. He'd pulled one hand out and was gesturing lightly as he talked, and now I was close enough, or he was speaking slightly louder, because I caught fragments. Not the whole sentences. Just enough. Just one word, man, that's all I'm asking. And, the guard, I could see him clearly now from my angle. Young. Younger than I'd initially thought from a distance, maybe early to mid-20s. The bearskin hat making it hard to read his expression from the front, but, from where I was standing slightly to the side, I could see his face in partial profile. Square jaw. Eyes forward. The perfect, deliberate blankness of a man who had spent significant portions of his training learning to make his face do exactly nothing. I know you can hear me. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, honestly, I genuinely just want to know. His family had noticed now. The mother had turned from wherever she'd been looking and was watching with the slightly mortified expression of parents of teenagers the world over. The man with the camera was actually filming. The little sister had lost interest in the pigeons. The boy had an audience. And he knew it. He took a small step sideways, moving along the fence, and now he was angling himself differently, still talking, still that same conversational tone, but now he'd clearly shifted his approach. Whatever the first thing he'd tried hadn't worked, the single word challenge, or whatever it was, and now he was trying something else. I still couldn't hear all of it. Something about a bet, I thought. Something about his friends not believing he'd done it. The guard stood like architecture. Priya had abandoned her photo and was watching too. What's he doing? She said quietly. Being 16, I said. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Here's the thing, though. Here is the thing that made this different from every other try to make the guard react routine I'd ever half-heartedly observed. The boy, after maybe 2 minutes of this, stopped. Just stopped talking. Stood there. And the silence was different from the silence that had come before. The previous silence had been his pauses between attempts. This silence was something else. He was looking at the guard with an expression I couldn't fully read from where I stood, but, even from 15 feet away, I could see that the performance had gone out of it. Whatever he was thinking, it wasn't, how do I get a reaction? It was something quieter than that. And then, he did the thing that nobody expected. He stepped back from the fence. Not a retreat, more like he was making space. Creating a little distance so he could actually look properly. And he stood there, really looking. At the guard. At the whole scene. The palace behind, the gray sky above, the flags, the gate, the immaculate red and black, the absolute carved stillness of a person who had decided to be exactly where they were and nothing else. "Mom," he said, and his voice carried now because he'd turned away from the fence and toward his family. "How long has he been standing there?" The tired woman blinked. "I don't know, love." "Like, this morning?" "Or since I think they do shifts," the man with the camera said. "A few hours, I'd imagine." The boy turned back. Looked at the guard again. "That's actually kind of mad," he said, very quietly. Not to his parents. Not to anyone. Just said it. And here is where I need to tell you about Marcus. Not the boy. The guard. Because what happened next involved Marcus, which was not his name, and I'll explain how I know what his name actually was in a moment, doing something that nobody standing at that fence in that particular configuration of October tourists expected him to do. He spoke. Not a lot. Not loudly. His head didn't move, his eyes didn't move, his whole body stayed exactly as it had been, a perfect column of trained stillness, but his jaw moved, just slightly, and 2 words came out. Not the reaction the boy had been trying for. Not the laugh or the blink or the acknowledgement of the performance. 2 words, very low, not quite under his breath but not loud either, said in the way that a person says something they have decided, on some quiet internal level, that they are allowed to say. 2 words. The boy went completely still. The crowd, the people close enough to have caught it or half caught it, who had registered that something had shifted in the air without being certain what, went that particular kind of quiet that a crowd goes when they're collectively trying to process whether they just saw what they thought they saw. Priya grabbed my arm. "Did he just," she started. "Yeah," I said. "I think so." The 2 words, as best as I and 2 other nearby tourists could later agree upon, were, "Good question." That was it. That was all. Good question. In a voice so level it barely qualified as a departure from silence. Now, I want to be careful here, because I know how these things get told and retold, and I know how easy it is for one unexpected thing happened to become the most extraordinary moment in human history by the time it's passed through enough people's memories. So let me be clear about what I mean when I say nobody expected it. It wasn't that the guard speaking was physically impossible. Guards do, on rare occasions, speak. They're required to issue warnings when safety is at stake, they have protocols, they are humans with voices. But, the context of it. The specific, quiet, almost conspiratorial quality of those 2 words in response to whatever the boy had asked, not a warning, not a procedural statement, not a firm command to step back, but, good question, with what seemed for all the world like the faintest trace of dry amusement, that was what hit the crowd the way it did. Because it wasn't breaking the performance. It was acknowledging it. Acknowledging the boy. Acknowledging that on some level, behind the bearskin and the stone face and the centuries of ceremonial training, there was a person in there who had heard a question, considered it, and found it, what? Worth 2 words. The boy stood very still for about 3 full seconds. Then, he laughed. Not the performed laugh he'd been aiming for earlier, not the look at me, I made the guard react laugh. A real one. Short, surprised, the laugh of someone who genuinely did not see that coming. What was the question? Priya whispered to me. I don't know, I said. I couldn't hear him. We both looked at the boy. He was still standing there, and the guard had returned to absolute statue stillness, as if those 2 words had never happened, as if the whole exchange had been imagined, and the boy was standing with his hands back in his hoodie pockets and an expression on his face that I can only describe as recalibrated. Like something had quietly realigned inside him. His mother called his name from a few feet away. Jamie. Jamie, come on, they're starting over there. And, Jamie, that was his name, Jamie, not the one I was trying to protect, turned around slowly, looked at his mom, looked at the camera his stepdad was still half raising, and then looked back at the guard one more time. "Yeah," he said. To himself, mainly. "All right." And he walked back to his family. The crowd, deprived of the dramatic escalation it had been bracing for, dissolved back into its normal tourist patterns within about 45 seconds. People returned to their photos, their maps, their pushchairs, their pigeons. The moment sealed itself over like water over a stone. But Priya and I looked at each other. And I knew we were thinking the same thing. Because we'd both been close enough, and been watching carefully enough, to notice the one other detail that sealed it. The detail that took the whole thing from mildly surprising to something that I have thought about, on and off, for the better part of 2 years since. The guard's face, in the profile I could see in the 10 or so seconds after those two words, in the settling stillness that followed, had done something almost too small to catch. Not a smile. Not even close to a smile. But the absolute opposite of the trained blankness it had been before. Some tiny, involuntary shift around the eyes. Some micro-adjustment that lasted less than a second and, then, was gone, sealed away again behind the ceremony. Something that, if you were being precise about it and not overstating, looked a lot like a person privately deciding that yes, this one was a good question, and that even within every constraint of protocol and tradition and the weight of centuries of ceremonial duty, they were allowed to have thought so. That was part 1. It gets more complicated from here. Here's what nobody tells you about Buckingham Palace on a Thursday morning in October. There's a cafe. Not right there, not on the palace grounds, obviously, but a short walk back up towards St. James's Park, on the edge of the park itself, one of those small green pavilion-style places with outdoor seating that stays open even when the weather is indifferent. The kind of place where the hot chocolates are good and overpriced and you don't mind paying. Priya found it on her phone while we were still standing at the fence, still slightly stunned by what we'd just seen, and she made the executive decision that we were going there immediately. "I need to sit down and process," she said. "You're not the one it happened to," I pointed out. "I witnessed it," she said, with the gravity of someone who had survived something. "That counts." So we went. And that's how we ended up at a small table near the path, with 2 overpriced hot chocolates, and why we were there when Jamie sat down 2 tables away from us. He'd found the place too, apparently. Or maybe his stepdad had. The family had descended on it with the coordinated relief of people who have been on their feet since before 9 and have collectively decided that sitting down somewhere with a warm drink is the only rational response to the human condition. The little sister had a hot chocolate that was mostly whipped cream. The stepdad was showing the mother something on his phone, probably the video he'd taken, though I couldn't be sure. Jamie had a Coke. He was sitting slightly apart from the family group in that way teenagers do when they're part of the family, but also, on some level, not one chair over from his mother, angled slightly outward, like a planet that's been partially caught by a gravitational field and is still trying to decide whether to orbit or drift. He was looking at his phone. Then, he put his phone down and looked at nothing for a moment. Then, he looked up and caught me looking at him. I looked away immediately with the absolute guiltiness of a person who has been caught staring. When I looked back, he was still looking at me. Not hostile, just that direct teenager thing. No particular performance to it this time. "You were there, yeah," he said. "At the fence. I saw you." Priya, without missing a beat, said, "We both were." He nodded. Not surprised. Just confirming. He looked at the table for a second, then, back up. "What did it sound like from where you were?" he asked. What he said. "Could you hear it clearly?" I told him what I'd caught. What Priya had caught. The 2 words, the low voice, the almost nothing quality of it. He nodded again, slower this time. "Yeah," he said. "That's, yeah." There was a pause. His mother had glanced over, registered that her son was talking to 2 strangers, done some rapid maternal threat assessment, and apparently decided we were harmless, because she turned back to the stepdad's phone. "What was the question?" Priya asked. The same thing she'd whispered to me at the fence. But, directly this time. Jamie looked at her for a moment. Like he was deciding something. I asked him, Jamie said, whether he ever gets angry. The pause that followed was longer this time. Not angry at anyone, like. Not angry at the tourists or whatever. He picked up his Coke and turned it in his hands, not drinking it, just handling it. I said, you spend all this time standing there and people come up to you and make faces at you and say stuff and act like you're not real, and I wanted to know, I asked him if he ever just gets angry. Not, like, rage or whatever. Just. Inside. Whether it builds up. He set the Coke back down. I don't know why I asked that. It just seemed like, I don't know. I'd been trying to get him to react and he wasn't reacting, and then I stopped trying, and when I stopped trying I just actually thought about it. About what it would actually feel like to do that. To just stand there. While people, like me, are standing 2 feet away treating you like some sort of challenge. And I thought, if I was him, I'd be furious. So I just asked. He shrugged. The way teenagers shrug when they want to seem like something matters less to them than it does. And he said, good question, I said. And he said, good question. He almost smiled. Which I guess means yes. Or means he's thought about it. I don't know. It's 2 words. He paused. But it felt like a lot more than 2 words. Do you know what I mean? We did. I've spent more time than is probably reasonable thinking about what those 2 words meant. Not obsessively, I have a life, I have other things to think about, but they come back to me. In the way that certain small moments do. The ones that aren't dramatic enough to be a memory you consciously preserve, but that lodged in something anyway, in some way you didn't choose. Good question. There are a lot of ways to read it. A person could argue it was pure accident, an involuntary slip of 2 words that slipped past the ceremonial training, doesn't mean anything beyond that, the guard probably didn't even register saying it. A person could argue it was actually protocol, that there are situations where a guard is permitted to acknowledge, and this was one of them, and it was calculated and deliberate and means nothing extraordinary. I don't fully buy either of those. Here's what I think, for whatever it's worth, from someone who was standing at an angle that gave me a partial view of that man's face and the moments around it. I think that question landed somewhere real. I think there's something about a teenage boy who has been performing confidence and performing challenge and doing the whole I can make the unshakable thing shake routine, suddenly stopping all of that and asking a genuinely human question. A question that looked through the costume and the ceremony and the layers of trained stillness and addressed the person inside it. Not as a trick. Not as the next gambit. Just as a person, asking another person something they actually wanted to know. And I think that was unexpected. More unexpected than any of the normal tourist attempts. Because those the guard had defenses against those he'd been trained to meet and absorb and not be moved by. But, being asked, with genuine curiosity, whether you ever get angry, whether the accumulated weight of being treated like a statue while being a person ever makes something burn in you that's harder to train against. Because it's not a challenge. It's an acknowledgement. Good question doesn't mean yes. It doesn't mean no. It means I heard you, and you said something real, and I am not going to give you more than 2 words, but I'll give you those. That's what I think. Jamie finished his Coke. His family was gathering itself, the little sister being recoordinated, coats being located, the whole logistical shuffling of a family unit preparing to relocate. He stood up, pushed his chair back. Then, he did something that I didn't expect. He looked at me and said, I'm going to go back. To the fence? Priya said. Yeah. Why? I asked. He thought about it for a moment. Actually thought, not performed thinking. Because I want him to know that I actually meant it, Jamie said. Like, the question. I don't want him to think I was just trying another tactic or something. I want him to know I just genuinely wanted to know. His mother said, Jamie, we've got the tour at 12:30, it'll be 5 minutes, he said. I'll meet you at the gate, the Victoria Gate, 5 minutes. She looked at him for a moment with the particular look that mothers give when they are deciding whether this is a battle worth having or not. Whatever she saw in his face made her decide not. 5 minutes, she said. I mean it. 5 minutes, he agreed. He looked at us again. Something slightly awkward in it, like he wasn't sure why he'd told us, strangers at the next table, or why he'd expected us to care. But we had cared. That was obvious, probably, which was its own slightly embarrassing thing. Want to come, he said. Priya looked at me. I looked at her. Obviously, she said. Walking back to the fence, Jamie's hands were back in his hoodie pockets, but the swagger was different. Not gone, it was still there, that tall teenage boy physical confidence, but the performance quality had gone out of it. He walked like someone going somewhere with a purpose they felt slightly unsure about, which is a very different thing from walking like someone going somewhere to be seen. There were more tourists at the fence now. The changing of the guard had drawn a bigger crowd along the front of the palace, and the energy had shifted, less scattered individual tourist clusters and more of a focused, assembled audience. The guards on the path had moved in the choreography of the ceremony, which meant different guards were now posted at the boxes nearest the gate. Jamie scanned the line. That's not him, he said. I looked. He was right, the profile was different, the height was different. They rotate, Priya said. She'd been reading something on her phone. Apparently the ceremonial change happens during the changing of the guard, so whoever was there before might be in there, Jamie said. He nodded toward the guardhouse, the interior of the palace forecourt. Somewhere behind the ceremony and the gates and the barriers. Yeah. He stood there for a moment. The crowd pressed gently around us. The ceremony happening further along was drawing the bulk of the attention, the music, the movement of the new guard contingent coming up from the direction of St. James's. People jostled for photos. Jamie looked at the new guard in the nearest box. Young, rigid, trained to stone. Then, he looked at the palace gate, the interior beyond. He won't know, Jamie said. Not complaining. Just stating it. Probably not, I said. Another silence. The kind that was doing its own work. But, you know, Priya said. Carefully, not quite a question. Jamie was quiet for a moment. The ceremony music drifted down the forecourt, brass, formal, ancient feeling. Yeah, he said finally. I know. He stood there another moment. Then, he nodded once, at no one in particular, and pushed his hands deeper in his pockets. I asked a good question, he said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't pride or wasn't only pride. Something more like the specific satisfaction of having accidentally been sincere at the right moment and having had it noticed. The kind of thing that doesn't come with a trophy or a reaction you can screenshot. Just the 2 words. Just good question. Just the knowledge of it. Then, his phone buzzed. He looked at it. My mom, he said. I've got to go. He looked at the palace one more time. At the new guard, rigid and sealed and present in that deep formal way. At the flags. At the gray October sky going slightly lighter now, the cloud thinning towards something that was almost afternoon. I'm going to remember this forever, he said, and I don't think he meant to say it out loud, because when he heard it come out of his mouth he looked briefly embarrassed. You should, I said. He looked at me for a second, then nodded a quick, slightly awkward nod, and then walked off toward the Victoria Gate at the pace of someone who is technically late but is not going to run. Priya and I watched him go. That was something, she said. Yeah, I said. I need to think about what kind of something. Me too, I said. We stood at the fence a while longer. The ceremony continued. The guards moved in their ancient, deliberate patterns. The crowd shifted and murmured. The sun made another attempt through the cloud layer and, this time almost succeeded, that watery London gold that never quite convinces you it's real, but is there. There's more to tell. Not from Jamie. I never saw him again after he disappeared through the crowds toward his mum and the half-12 tour and whatever the rest of that London trip held for them. But, from what came after, later that same afternoon, which was where the story took a turn that I hadn't seen coming and, which is, honestly, the part one think about most. That's part 2. The last part is the one that actually surprised me.